Alright, now let's see what we get to do with all that data we have captured on set. Firstly, we'll start with the data we collected
on lighting direction. We basically use this in 3D models and sometimes in compositing or post-viz to understand, remap, and replicate the direction of the light that was captured in the real world into a digital virtual environment. Usually, you would hand this data over to your 3D artist, who would then use it to create HDRI maps that will then project the lighting into a 3D environment.
Next up, we have
working with lighting hues. Again, we use this data in lighting up 3D models and in post-viz too, where it is important to retain the lighting quality, shade, and brightness from the set and translate that to 3D. Then of course we have the color tones, usually collected using the Macbeth chart.
As you can see here, I don't actually have a Macbeth chart, but I do have the DGK color tools, which pretty much can be used to get the tones of the, in this case, whites, blacks, and grays in this very production environment. Now back to our Macbeth chart, however.
Again, we would normally use this in lighting our 3D models and even when compositing different layers and trying to match the color saturation and hues in the scene. Another important type of data we would have gotten from set would then be the camera data and values. Info such as the f-stop, lens number, focal length, shot type, etc. Again, the visual effects team uses this data mainly in post-viz and in 3D environment replication, even for completely CG shots sometimes, depending on the production and the cinematic story.
Speaking of cinematic stories and dependence, at times, you may work on a production where motion capture data would be captured. In this case,
the data would normally be used in the realistic 3D animation of characters and sometimes in post-viz too, where that mocap data would be used to do a rough animation of specific 3D models, to let the supervisor and director see what the final visual effects and animated character could potentially look like. Then of course, we have something known as the virtual camera production data, usually used for, again, you guessed it, the replication of a 3D environment, or in post-viz, where the captured tracking data from the shot is actually recorded with a draft version of the CG environment on camera. Now, next up, depending on the production, sometimes the director and producers want to shoot a film in 3D using 3D cameras. Now, if that is the case, then additional data you would be getting on set would be the camera values from a stereoscopic camera, including, for example, the stereoscopic camera disparity between the lenses, the zero parallax point for each shot, the distances between the foreground and background from each camera, etc. Again, all these changes as well with how advanced your 3D camera is. All this simply to capture and retain the depth data from production to either be used in stereo compositing or in replicating a scene accurately in 3D.
And of course, you may have LiDAR scans and 3D scanning data for model replication through volumetric clouds, or for use in advanced 3D tracking. In fact,
LiDAR data can be used in many things even beyond visual effects, but we're not going to get into that right now. In the visual effects world, LiDAR data is mainly used in creating 3D models, environment set building, or getting accurate and precise data measurements to create depth and volumetric projections digitally. Whew! Okay, we're almost done here, I swear. But as you can probably tell by now, there is a lot of data you have to collect from set. So, as a visual effects supervisor, you better not fudge it up with, chocolate fudge? Anyway, back to it. Camera dollies and automated track calculations. Depending on the brand and tools that come with the equipment, the data collected from these machines basically would be used in the generation of virtual cameras in 3D space, translating all that mathematical calculations and data to move these cameras in something like Maya, for example, to perhaps track in a 3D environment or a bunch of characters.
Okay. Actor measurements, used to create 3D model replicas of actors for any insane stunts, for impossible visual effects superpowers, or for scale comparison, as you can see right here.
Notice the scale right there on me? The visual effects team can easily use this to create a safe 3D clone that they can then do crazy stuff to.
And lastly, we have the final set of production data that you or your post-production team would most likely work with from set.
Anything interesting that happens in the shot that might be useful in post, usually written in physical or even digital notes, for any unexpected useful utility in post-production. For example, anything unexpected that happens in the shot, well, they're usually stuck in the notes. I mean, you'll never know.
Now with an understanding of how to use production data, let's finally move on to how to work with graded colored shots in visual effects. As a soup, it is important to know what the final tinted or colored look of your scene would look like, not only to give proper guidelines to artists, but also to be able to supervise the set more effectively. So, let's move on to the next lesson on color lights.